Hey, Miguel Dorati back here on the CRP and in our never-ending quest for material and combat sports-related content, I've invited my good buddy Mike Davis. Mike Davis, the cornerstone of the Fighters Corner podcast that's out there. Been making a lot of waves, a lot of big interviews, including a recent interview with Ken Shamrock. And that's what we're going to focus on here. This and by lately, I mean the last couple of years, there's been a real buzz in the combat sports business about
Bare knuckle
bare knuckle
boxing.
fighting, bare
Yeah.
knuckle boxing, and varying companies and things like that. And Mike, I labeled you one of the experts on this. Valor BK went down this past weekend. I know that you were on the pulse of that event. And that was something that former MMA legend or former UFC champion and MMA legend Ken Shamrock was involved in. Why don't you fill people in on a little bit of what's going on in the bare knuckle world, and then tell people about Valor BK this past weekend up in North Dakota.
Well, there was both good and bad, and the good far outweighed the bad. The bad, you will knock that out. There's an interviewer, the schmo. He's got a big following. I mean, I might get a tenth of the pulse that he has. So I mean, he was interviewing guys before they went out there. It was kind of gimmicky. It was kind of obnoxious. They're going to work those kinks out. But if you actually look at Valor itself, it's done in a pit, and it's got a ledge on it that's like on a pitch and is fast. Because when you run through when you watch bare knuckle boxing, you run through them fast. These are even faster. Like they burn through these, and it's high octane. And I think once the combat sports crowd starts to kind of understand that there's other options outside of MMA out there, bare knuckle boxing is gonna it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And Valor, they had a really good first show. They had a phenomenal tournament. They had good guys in the card. I predicted Mark Godbeer would win the heavyweight tournament. He did, and it was a good show. It was a good show, man. I was impressed.
And let's go ahead and go through the fight. So, a lot of MMA guys, making the transition over there. What's your take on that?
You know, do you ever like have a favorite hockey team, then a whole bunch of retreads kind of come back there, and you have love for them, but their output just isn't as what it used to be, but you still love them. And I'm glad that there's an outlet here that's available for those guys. It keeps me entertained. It keeps me interested, but it's still in kind of the growing stages. Like they're gonna have stars. Like Europe right now is more advanced than the United States in terms of making stars. And the thing with Valor is they at least acknowledge the champions from other organizations. To where other organizations here try to pretend like others don't exist. Valor doesn't do that. Like I, I like it, man. I like it. I think they just need their own star. They gotta find a YouTube sensation, bring them over, and let it carry through. It's going to happen. It's just who and when.
So let's talk about this first Valor card then, and then talk a little bit about Ken Shamrock and his association with this.
All
You're
right.
talking about a situation, just really quick. Keeping track for people who may have lost track of Ken. He's 55 years old now, but he's done some recent pro wrestling appearances. Also, recently did some stem cell treatments, I think. So he's kind of feeling pretty good. He's not thinking of doing this, is he?
Nah, he looks phenomenal. He's done what I think he's trying to do. And I interviewed him. I had him for about an hour and a half, and we went through mostly Japan in our interview. Everyone's talked to him to death about the UFC. There's no little angles that I could shed on that he hasn't already, in regards to that. But Ken's a pro wrestler through and through, and that's what he is first and foremost. Secondly, he's a fighting and a submission guy, and I think what he's trying to do is recreate the feeling of the first few UFCs. And you know what, man? He successfully did that on this event. He did. It was a success. Now, the pay-per-view buys, I guarantee they got beat up. But if you look at the Poly Malignaggi, Artem Lobov fight, they had under 40,000 buys on that. So it's the beginning stages, man. It is. And you know what? If you didn't watch Valor, it's $30. Go buy it. Support the sport. It's fantastic, man. Fantastic product. And Feldman's got a good product as well. I mean, I even buy the ones from Europe. The ones from Europe are only $15. They just had it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think people need to just kind of understand it's here to stay. Give it a watch. Check it out. And Valor, that last Valor, it was definitely a good product. Definitely a good product.
So going through the card here in terms of name recognition, the heavyweight tournament, Mighty Mo, MMA K1 veteran, Sokuju,
That's what they
MMA
started
veteran,
with. That's what they started the show with.
Mark Godbeer, another known MMA veteran, Jack May. I may not be familiar with the name or his resume. LeVar Johnson in the alternate fight, also an extensive MMA career at one point, and then a couple of preliminary fights. On the card, Chris Jensen and John Carmona, Joshua Dyer. Talk about the highlights from the event.
All right. Well, the fight that I had predicted, which would be fight of the night, was the J.C. Lamas. Was it Mike Good? Was it Goodwin, right? Mike Goodwin and
Mike Richmond.
Or Mike Richmond. Man,
Yeah.
I don't know why I botched that. I predicted that was going to be fight of the night. J.C. Lamas gave Chris Lytle all he had in Cancun when they had fought Bare Knuckle. And originally from Puerto Vallarta, I think he's living and training in Southern California right now. He's from a legit gym in Mexico. One of the few. There's not a lot of legit gyms in Mexico. He's definitely from one of them. And I predicted that was going to be a really good fight, and it fell short. It fell short. There was a referee called a foul on a headbutt. Kind of confusing. Even Milicic was a little confused by it, but I think they're going to run that one back. Like if I were to pick out some issues with the pit, it's too small. The ropes in the ring and the corners, they give you places to hide. You don't have that luxury in that pit. It's just there's nowhere to hide. So guys was it Ishe Smith? They kept running up on the sides of it, and it was unintentional. They got to open it up a little bit more. They got to go a little bit bigger. They got to go about 30 feet, I think, on that circle.
Okay,
But,
and that's the kind of thing where it's like it's sometimes, do you think that the American public is going to give us this sport a chance to go through that type of growing pains very visibly? Because in the absence of a star, and I'll tell you just one of the criticisms, and I'm not one to criticize athletes like that, but it does look like a B-class MMA fight. The catch here is
100%. Everyone was wearing pants too. I didn't understand that.
Obviously then there is, we're seeing some of the work that needs to be done there. But to me, if you took this card and it was an MMA card, you're looking at a LFC level. It might be on TV, kind of, because the company has a deal with local television or whatever it is. But you're not talking about UFC or even Bellator level competition anymore. You're talking about older athletes and people transitioning that. Now, I think that hurts them in terms of image. I think they'd be better off, trying to introduce a whole new crop of crazies.
You're not going to hear me argue, but when you're going to do something like that, I think the first thing was just to get eyes on the event. And, when you do something like that, you really got to be watching social media, like who moves the needle, who gets 500-600 likes or 1,000 likes every time they post. And, the only people that are doing that are the old school, like we had said, retreads. And I think initially they're going to have to get a base, even if it's a $20,000 buy rate. And then they're going to have to start building stars, but to do that, you're going to have to do 8 to 10 events a year. I mean, that.
And let me ask you now, in terms of like the fighting athlete, what are you looking at there with Artem Lobov? We saw, that's the highest profile fight of the year, right? With Paulie, he had fought just a few months before that, right? So now, is this the kind of thing where you could reasonably expect to get 5 fights a year as an up and coming athlete? How do you work around that?
I was shocked. In fact, after that fight, I leaned next to my buddy that I was at that fight live, and I said, "There's no way this guy's fighting in 2 months against Paulie. There's just no way." I mean, he did it, and I no, here, Mark Godbeer won a tournament. He beat Mighty Mo, okay, and I mean he smoked everybody. And Mighty Mo, I mean, to his credit, he got ran over by the truck named Theory Sokuju prior to it, so it's not like, I mean, that guy went in there as a wounded animal and refused to pull out. LeVar Johnson's going to be next, but you're going to have to do 4-man tournaments. That's how you can't fight 5 times a year, but you might be able to fight twice in one night. You know, it's the only way you're going to do it. That's how the UFC did it. That's how they built their Don Fries and their Ken Shamrocks and their Brian Johnstons. You know, the Matt Humes. You're gonna have to fight more than one time in one night. It's the only way to do it. Smart move.
Yeah, and the tournaments have their own bugaboos. They go away and they come back, but that's I think the important thing, and what you're making note of here is
Yeah.
when they come back here. Now, this format may actually be the best suit for a 1-day tournament. And
Mark Godbeer looks like a hero.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, 4-man tournaments are a little more reasonable, and
8-man.
but you could actually, 8-man tournaments are not not something completely of another time. They've gone down the last 20 years and stuff, and they've been successful, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. What doesn't work to me is the first fight, and then 2 months later try the second fight of the tournament, and then 3, type of thing. I would stay away from if I were bare knuckle, because you got no guarantees that you're going to be able to bring people back in 2 months once you start a tournament. But in one day, I agree with you, and I think that right there, that gives you a very self-contained buzz. Now, you said 8 to 10 events a year. What are they doing in terms of weight classes, and what can you tell us about that? Because there are a lot of companies. Like, is there like a general bare knuckle format where I can say lightweights are 150 pounds? Is it weight classes and stuff? Give the people a description.
Well, here we go. I mean, you're kind of caught. In boxing has too many weight classes. We can agree on that. MMA doesn't have enough weight classes. We can also agree on that. It should be every 10 pounds, but 25, 35, 45, all the way up. And they're going by MMA weight classes right now. That's also including in Europe as well. That's across the board. For them to distinguish themselves, they're going to have to go every 10 pounds. They shouldn't cut it off at 70. It should be 65, 75, 85. 85, 95. And that's how boxing should be, in my opinion, as well. When you're only going up 3 or 4 pounds and it's a completely different weight class, it kind of diminishes, one of the belts in between those is going to be diminished. One of the things I'd like to see them do as well is honor some of the old school bare knuckle guys like Jem Mace. Even battling Siki, although he was a glove fighter, he also had some bare knuckle bouts. If they were to name some of their belts after those guys, I'd really like that as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that you always hear in the United States about the famous John L. Sullivan fight in Mississippi, I believe, or in Louisiana, and in the 1880s, the last bare knuckle world championship.
It was in New Orleans. Yeah, it was New Orleans. Okay.
And
how we know that?
Well, no. I mean, I've done a good bit of reading on the subject, and I enjoy the pre-glove era as well. And that's the notable thing is it got sort of driven underground and got replaced by glove fighting, and that all took off and stuff. But they've tried to kill it before, and now here we are 100 years later, and they haven't killed it. It's still it's still around, and now beginning to make a comeback. As you pointed out, the stars are there, are what's missing and what's necessary. But I think you're right with the history of it. You can
bring it back, Bob Fitzsimmons. Bob Fitzsimmons. There should be a statue of that guy somewhere. I mean, there's a whole history of what led to the Broughton rules first in ancient history there, which were the original rules, and that came from a death
that they said, okay, somebody, Jack Broughton actually killed somebody, so he instituted certain rules so that that was the start of the whole thing. And yeah, I think all that history really, it gets parallel with MMA history. MMA history gets, because of time and the 21st century and stuff, a lot of things like commission acceptance and thing happened a lot faster. But you'd be remiss to ignore the history of bare knuckle boxing and where boxing actually comes from, which is that, fights on barges in the United States because, evading the law and fighting on a boat because of I mean,
Yeah. Well,
you're
here.
talking about that's a Bob Fitzsimmons story.
I mean, if I can give you an example, look at that poster right there. That's in German. It says Jiu-Jitsu, and was it Foster Kampf? That's a Willie Menke poster from Germany, pre-World War II, somehow survived. And it's probably the oldest Jiu-Jitsu poster in the world, but it's a carnival, and that's what bare knuckle is. Bare knuckle is circus. It's a sideshow. People love sideshows. I know. The Pride Days, in my opinion, were some of the greatest MMA events ever. And can bare knuckle? They're gonna have that sideshow feel to it, but the purists like you and I, we're gonna kind of see through that, and something is going to happen in the world of bare knuckle that is going to captivate an audience, and it's going to have a good niche, a sizable following. And it's is it going to surpass MMA? Probably not. Is it going to keep up with boxing? Probably not. But I mean, NHL hockey can't keep up with the NFL or MLB or NBA, but it's significant.
Yeah, so put it in perspective, and I think comparing it maybe to an NHL with the boxing and MMA, being a little bit bigger sports, that might be an accurate comparison. But let me ask you this in terms of that: how are you seeing the people that are involved in the sport? Obviously, on the face side, they got Ken Shamrock here. Now you've actually been to Europe and stuff, and
I've
then
been to
now
Europe.
you get into some travelers and maybe some rough customers and stuff. Now, does it have like a mainstream hook that way, or is it really going to be a turnoff once it hits the mainstream
Yeah.
because there are going to be some rough customers,
Here, I have an answer to this. One, there's a ton of travelers there. And, they refer to themselves as gypsies. I know some people say, you're not supposed to say gypsy. They got it in their nicknames. They call themselves gypsies. They call themselves travelers. Am I ignorant of the culture? Yeah, probably. But I'm friends with these guys on Facebook, and they call themselves that. So I'm going to refer to them as gypsies because that's what I call them. And all right, so I was at the Coventry event. I cornered Shoney Carter and I cornered Melvin Gillard. I helped Shoney train for the fight against Jimmy Sweeney, who is, in my opinion, pound for pound, the best bare knuckler in the modern era. Not the world right now. I'm saying in the modern era. And they were traveling all around Europe. They went to London, and they didn't really have a street crew there because I didn't see any posters. I'm a promoter here in Chicago, so I'm looking around. I don't see any posters in any windows. We went to Coventry after the event. We went out, and people were like, "Where are you guys from? Where are you coming here?" We were telling them what we went to, and it was, I'd really like to go and see that. I just didn't know it was here. Well, they moved the show to London. They're selling out the small O2, and they're making plans to be bringing some really big names over, and they're planning on going to the big O2 eventually. Now, do I think they can fill that spot? I think it's obviously a little too early, but their last three shows at the small O2 have absolutely been sold out, and it's a fantastic product. So I think, all right. So do you remember like early 2000s? The UFC would be on, and it was fantastic. But there'd be like a local event on that same day, and there'd be 2,000, 3,000 people at the local event on at the same night as the UFC, and no one knew the UFC was on, but everyone knew the local event was there because of the grassroots marketing that the promoters did. I think we're going to see that. I think right now the live event, if they can take it outside of the Dakotas and start touring with it, the last event in Tampa was huge. Their next event, they're going back there. It's going to be even bigger. And I think if you take it to Indiana, some of the flyover states in the Midwest, I think you'll draw crowds of 7,000 people easily, easily. So do I think there's a market there? Yeah, you just gotta. Someone's gonna have to figure it out, and it's gonna be through a grassroots level.
So when's the next Valor?
They haven't announced the next date yet, but BKFC Feldman's group is they're saying that they're doing like 10 to 12 events next year. So they're talking about going once a month. And Nate Shook, who is their matchmaker, is constantly making posts just, who wants to do it? Who wants to do it? Who wants to do it? I think these retreads are going to be headlining the card until the undercard guys make enough big of a name for themselves to where they can start headlining. Artem Lobov, technically he's a retread. He's certainly, here in America, probably the biggest name here. So, Chris
Yep.
Lieben was on his way. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's growing. I'm in. I want to watch it.
Okay, and it warrants looking at now. Have you found odds for it at the books?
It's starting to get there. I noticed some of the books have. Here we go. If I'm a t-shirt company or I'm an equipment company, for $5,000 you can get a corner pad. For $10,000 you can get a floor spot. Some of these videos are getting upwards of 1 million views. Not everyone's got 10 grand, but if I had it, I certainly would want a floor spot somewhere. These videos are getting 1 million views now. Making them convertible to sales, man, that's something. That's out of my scope. But right now, the buy value of a mat spot on any of these organizations, right now it's buy. I would do a multi-fight deal. Like if I had the opportunity and I had a product I was pushing, I would absolutely buy 20 fights. Get a deal, $5,000, 20 fights. But if they're going to make something happen, it's probably going to be within the next 10 to 15 fights. By 20 fights, you're already in all of their back catalog and library. I mean, you're right there. Right now is buy. If I was a sports book, like operating somewhere, I'd jump in right now. Making him convertible, that's something different.
Now,
Yeah.
as we close here with the bare knuckle scene, what go ahead and list off some of the other potential like bigger names in MMA and stuff that may be rumored to be heading over there or they've done it. You mentioned Melvin Guillard and stuff. Go through a little bit of the recent history with some of the names. I know Wes Sims has dabbled or was thinking about dabbling, and some of the others. So we'll close off with that. I also heard a Mark Coleman rumor, and I hope it isn't true.
No, they were trolling. They were trolling Shamrock. Yeah.
Good, because post hip replacement fighters are lacking an explosion. Yeah, we can. And Mark used to be known for that.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be that sad,
If I had to name one fighter that I'd like to see come over, it's Mark Hunt.
Yeah. Hunt's got that Mighty Mo's style and with the time.
That Samoan type.
My problem with it is I'd like to see, let's do Mark Hunt at 30 years old. How about that? What I don't want to bring him over at 44 in a rougher sport than the one he's been in, So, but I do agree with you. I think that there's certain guys, if you're thinking back into like real MMA history. I don't know if you remember a guy, he did an MMA fight against Bart Vale named Mike Bitonio. Now, Mike Bitonio passed away, but go watch Bart Vale versus Mike Bitonio, and you tell me if Bitonio wouldn't be the first guy online to do this.
I'd say the biggest
and there are a lot of guys like from the early days, I think, that would appeal to them. Yeah, and this would appeal to them a lot more than what an MMA has become because it had, in the early days, that rawness. Part of it was the unpredictability, and now there really is less unpredictable unpredictability in MMA. It's just MMA fights are MMA fights. They all have started to look the same.
the biggest miss happening right now, like you're talking about names and stuff like that. So Diesel Joe Riggs, about a year and a half ago, gets flown over to Europe to go fight their champion. His name escapes me right now. I don't think he's fought since that fight, to be honest with you. And Riggs beats him. He's doing Superman punches. There's no rules against Superman punches. So he's doing Superman punches, socks this guy up, gets their title, and then comes over here and starts fighting for Feldman's group. In Feldman's group, he goes 2-0-1. His last fight was a draw. Won the first 2 rounds, got caught in the third round, almost got finished. So if you're looking for an undisputed world champion, that's not arguable. It's Joe Diesel Riggs. And they never put a belt on him when he was over there, over with Feldman's group. I heard he's not fighting for them anymore, but he's never lost. He is an undisputed world champion that's not wearing a belt right now. And if I was Valor, I'd capitalize on that. And they're already acknowledging other belts. Joe Riggs is the only world champion here in the United States that you can say without a question of a doubt, inarguably, it's him. So I hope Valor scoops up Joe Riggs. And plus I'm a fan of the guy.
Yeah, that's I think kind of the mold of the guys is like kind of the hardworking guys who are toiling in MMA, kind of getting maybe some of the level you got to a certain level, and then maybe they're on a downslide and stuff, and then you're not in UFC anymore, and all of a sudden you're off the radar. And now there's a good way to come back on the radar.
I think Joe Riggs has got like an 8 or 9 fight win streak happening right now in MMA. But the rumor is that he owes so much money to the tax man that he's afraid to go back and fight for them again because they'll garnish his wages, which is, I'd like to sit here and say I'm speaking like, hey man, maybe I shouldn't say this, but the guy was, holding form in Cancun and letting everybody know that he didn't care, So
I understand, and a lot of that stuff. It's like everybody, you got to take care of yourself. But it does bring to mind the question is what are the main event guys getting paid? What did Mark Godbeer take home yesterday? Did he get 100,000?
I didn't get a chance to look online. I don't think I think they fought in North Dakota. I don't think the North Dakota Commission releases that statement, but I have a feeling that tournament paid well. They had all big names in there, and Mark Godbeer. Well, here, let me backtrack. Mark Godbeer won the title in Europe as well. He had some contract disputes. I think they wanted an exclusivity for him, and Mark Godbeer realized that he could probably make more money here, and they had a bit of a falling out. In fact, you can't even see that fight online over there. They've just completely erased it from actually happening, other than a few newspaper articles that you could read online. But Godbeer also is, in my opinion, a world title holder, with the exception that Feldman's got a heavyweight title, was it Shane Sherman? Just beat Arnold Adams for it, which I thought I was expecting more out of Adams, to be honest with you. I thought Adams was going to win that fight, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to get off offensively. So, my opinion, you win a 4-man tournament here, you're legit. I know Arnold Adams won a tournament to get that belt over 3 different events, but at the end of the day, Mark Godbeer, like if you had to rank world champions, Mark Godbeer, I'd put above Shane Sherman. And that's just, is it WBA, is it WBO, IBF? It's kind of become an alphabet soup of belts, but I would say Godbeer, based on his 2-fight performance, especially with the 2 amazing knockout victories, it's hard for me to rank anybody above him right now in the heavyweight division.
All righty. I'm Miguel Dorati for the CRP. That's Mike Davis, and we've been talking about the bare knuckle phenomenon that's been on the rise for the last couple of years, and it all came to a head this past weekend with Valor BK and a 4-man tournament won by Mark Godbeer. It went down in North Dakota. Mike giving us the scoop on the bare knuckle. You're going to be our bare knuckle correspondent, Mike.
My man. I'm in.
All right. Well, I do thank you very much for joining us, and we'll catch up here soon. Any final words? Any plugs you want to give?
No, I'm cool.
All right, brother. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Bye-bye.